Hello, my name is Levon Afeyan, and I come to you once again from Montreal, Canada. This is the fourth of a series of conversations that showcase renowned Armenians from Canada. The Armenia 2041 project recognizes the fact that many of us spend a lot of time discussing our past and present, yet we dedicate very little time imagining our collective future. Our hope is that these conversations will give our audience the opportunity to become acquainted with our esteemed guests, many of whom have been involved with Armenian affairs, and to see if together we can imagine a brighter future for our global Armenian nation. My guest today is a well known Canadian writer and film director of Armenian descent. He wrote his first play at the age of 13. Over 20 movies, earning him many international prizes, such as the Grand Prix at the 50th Cannes Film Festival, along with a jury prize and the prize of the ecumenical jury. He was also nominated for an Academy Award as Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay. He has been called one of Canada's best and most respected directors. As you probably predicted, my guest today is Atom Egoyan. He joins us from Toronto, Ontario. Welcome, Atom, to our program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Atom, you were born in an Armenian family in Cairo. Your parental grandfather moved to Egypt just before 1915. Your grandmother was a survivor of the Armenian Genocide. Your maternal grandfather was also born in Caesarea and moved to Cairo before the massacres as well. At the age of 2, your family moved to Victoria, British Columbia. Tell us a little about your early childhood and your upbringing. How were you introduced to your Armenian roots, and how did that form your identity?
Well, Armenian was my first language. So when we moved to Canada, that's what I spoke. And I spoke it with my grandmother. And really, until she left Victoria to go to Montreal, I probably didn't speak any other language. And then suddenly I became completely assimilated. Once my grandmother left, uh, we spoke English at home, and really in that city, we were, I think, probably the only Armenian family. There was no community at the time. There is a small community now, a larger one in Vancouver, of course. But so there was none of the traditional pillars of Armenian identity. Uh, there was no church. There was really no language in the house, Armenian language, and there was really no community to speak of. But I was always aware of it. I was aware that we were Armenian. I was aware that we were different from the other people. Once a year, we would go to Vancouver for the blessing of the grapes. A priest would come from Montreal, but it was really distant. Sometimes I say that I'm as far away as you can get from the traditional pillars of what the community or what it means. I won't go into the details of why my parents ended up in Victoria, but really when we came to Canada, there was this desire to go out west and to explore something new and not to be part of the community. My parents were quite unusual that way. They didn't feel like the rest of my family still lives in Montreal. All my uncles and aunts and cousins, they're all in Montreal. And we were aware of that. We would go back and visit them in the summer, but it was very different from the upbringing I had.
You grew up in British Columbia, but you received your bachelor's degree in international studies from Trinity College at the University of Toronto. But your
Yeah.
interest in the arts prompted you to look towards a career in theater. As I mentioned earlier, you wrote your first play at the age of 13. Can you share with us the path you took that led you to a career as a film director?
Well, my parents were both artists. They met. There was a very famous art teacher in Cairo called Ashot Zorian, and so they met under his workshop. And so my father had a show of his work when he was 16 in Cairo, and they really wanted to pursue their lives as artists. And when they came to Victoria, they had a gallery. They were one of the first private galleries, and they had a store in Cairo, but. Um, I was aware always that you could make art, but you needed something practical as well to make a living, and my parents made that pretty clear. And their living was selling furniture. I used to deliver furniture with my father to various customers, and so I thought I would never make a living as an artist, so I wanted maybe to think of something that I was attracted to, and diplomacy. I always loved the idea of international relations and diplomacy. So I went to this very good college at the University of Toronto, Trinity, which specialized, had a program in international relations. But I always kept up my theater work, and I was always interested in theater mostly. But then a play of mine got rejected by the University of Toronto, the Dramatic Society. So this sounds strange, but I thought, okay, I'll make it as a film because there was a film club there. And so I took the idea, and I really just, there was a camera, and I started exploring how to tell this story visually. And I realized this is what I loved. I'd done some short films in Victoria, but I really thought, okay, this is, so I went through the University of Toronto with my studies in international relations, but I was started to make films, short films, using the equipment that they had at the university. And by the time I graduated, I was this is what I wanted to do. I realized that this is something I was very passionate about. I was still writing plays. I was a member of at the Tarragon Theatre, which is quite a well-known theatre in Toronto, as a playwright. But it was filmmaking that became my obsession. And so I never went to film school as such, which is a surprise, but I taught myself how to make film just by watching films that I loved and studying them. And again, having access to like handheld cameras, and at the time film stock was very expensive, so you would have to get little grants, and just teaching myself, so I never, the toughest part was finding community of other people I could make films with. So that was the next big step. So started hanging around a film school that I'm teaching at now. Actually, it was called Ryerson. Now it's called Toronto Metropolitan. And so I would hang around and just meet other film students, and we formed a community, and we're still friends today, actually.
In one of your interviews, you talked about your father who visited Armenia during Soviet times. You
Hmm.
said he went to Nagapert and returned a changed man. He
Yeah,
broke
yeah.
down and cried while standing next to the eternal flame. It was as if the pillars had crushed him. Um, how did this experience affect you, and how did it manifest itself in your career and in your films?
Very deeply. I mean, again, my parents, I knew about the identity, but this idea of the trauma of it wasn't really clear until when my parents came back from Armenia I was about 14, 15, and my father just, it really affected him being at Tizianabert. Like he felt like all those pillars were actually falling on him, and his mother was a orphaned by the genocide, and we never knew where my grandmother was from. And uh, he would remember this. She would sing Yeraz, so we knew this, and that's why figures very much in Ararat, my film, because it was this song that my father remembered his mother singing. So it was a transmission from my grandmother into this film, which was very powerful for me to be able to do it. But I knew about this trauma and this deep well of pain, unresolved, that my father had. And I actually, at that point I wrote a script about the genocide, which I never made, but ended up becoming the film in Ararat. This film about the defense of Van, that was written really in my early 20s. And I brought it back to make this film within the film that you see when you watch Ararat.
And very certainly, which had a huge effect on the push towards recognition. That movie was quite successful, especially in Canada, I guess.
Yeah, I was very proud. We had a screening in Ottawa, and actually a year later, Canada recognized the Armenian genocide. The film won Best Canadian Film that year. So there was a lot of it brought a lot of awareness. Not to, and but there was the community here was very involved in these things already. So it's not just the film that changed it. People have been working on this for many years, and I think we have to really give the credit to the community leaders who were bringing this matter to attention. The film came at the right time, for sure. It was a great way to focus all these issues.
Talking about the community, especially in Toronto, you received the grand prize of the Golden Apricot Film Festival in Toronto ago, and later became the president of the honorary board. You are now a member of the Armenian Association of Fellows. Can you talk to us about that, please?
Yeah, it's an organization of mostly academics, but people who are trying to use their collective wisdom to try and see what we can do for the country. You know, how to activate. You know, mostly. I mean, I would say a lot of the work is by scientists and people who are like engineers and people who have a background in practical things that we can offer. And I've been in discussions as well in terms of moving, you know, like what we can do for film. And it really, I mean, I was really proud, you know, like to be involved with the Golden Apricot Film Festival and for 10 years as president. And you know, we invited a lot of filmmakers, very famous filmmakers to Yerevan to see what the country had to offer. There are practical issues, but the one thing I would like to plant in people's mind is that you know, when we do soundtracks for films, very often we use orchestras in Budapest or Prague, and I never understood why we can't use Yerevan, right? Yerevan, we have these amazing musicians, like incredible high standard of musicianship. We have an orchestra, you know, and you know, like one of my ideas, and you know, really through we're trying to pursue this through the Armenian Society of Fellows, is what can we do to make it a reality that we can actually perhaps think of recording soundtracks for major films in Armenia, so that the way we do it is that the directors and the producers could be in Los Angeles or Toronto, but they're linked up to an orchestra that's in another city, and you know it works. It can work really well, but you know we have to kind of think of how to do this practically. So I'm putting that idea out there. Actually, you know, like this is something to pursue because it's viable. You know, like what we need now are solutions which are practical and viable, and that we can use the, you know, the tremendous like brain power and talent that's in Armenia to execute them. So I don't know how realistic it is now to bring production to the country from outside, especially it's so politically volatile right now. But we can do this. We can certainly use our standard of musicianship and really professionalism to maybe find that there might be a solution in helping to produce soundtracks.
You have also recently began directing operas. This is
Yeah,
particularly interesting to me because my uncle Boris Afeyan was also an opera
yeah.
director in Bulgaria back in the 1960s, and he was actually the guest director at the Yerevan State Opera for a while.
Uh,
If I remember correctly, you were to direct the opera Salome in Montreal.
I'm doing Salome in Toronto coming up in 23. Actually, it opens in February. So we're already starting work, but I was going to do, but I've done, I was involved with the first Canadian Ring Cycle, Wagner's Ring Cycle. That was a big production. I was involved in Cosi fan tutte that we did here, and also I've done some things in other countries, and it's very exciting because I love putting together drama and music. Like to me, when I'm making a film, as you might have guessed when we're talking about the Armenian Society of Fellows, this idea of fusing the two elements of music and drama is something that I find very exciting. You can see it in Ararat, right? There's a lot of music. Brilliant composer Michael Dana, who now is a big Hollywood composer. He won a Academy Award, an Oscar for Life of Pi, and he's very active. And we've had a very long relationship from my first films. And he, you know, I'll never forget the recording session we did in Yerevan. We all of the choir work was done there. A lot of all the folk music was recorded in Yerevan. So we came in 2001, and we were already, I guess, this music idea. We were doing that actually back then, using Armenian talent and bringing it to the rest of the world.
So I'm assuming we're going to see more operas by Atom Egoyan in the future. That's wonderful. But
I enjoy it.
let me,
Your aunt was also a singer, a great singer, right? She was very famous.
yes, Nadia Afeyan was a soprano, well-known soprano. She was of Bulgarian origin but kept the name. She sang
Yeah.
for 40 years or so on international stages.
Wow. Great.
But I want to change the subject a little bit now. Let's talk about our identity. You and I grew up during the same period of the diaspora. We were taught to keep our heritage through language, culture, religion, and traditions. We had a common purpose, and that was the recognition of the Armenian genocide and the always hope of establishing a free and independent Armenia. Now that
Mm.
Armenia is an independent republic and most of the world has recognized the genocide as an historic fact, how do you think the diaspora can convince the next generation to hold on to their culture and remain attached to their roots? In other words, is the preservation of our culture, the so-called Hayabahbanun, a goal or a means to achieve a goal? And if it is a means, then maybe what should the goal be?
Well, okay, I'm speaking as an artist, so, and I'm also saying that those traditional pillars were not part of my formation. I didn't have the language, I didn't have the church, I didn't have the community, but what I had was art, right? And so I was very aware of Armenian artists, and and one of the things I'm most proud about with Ararat is it's in some ways it also functions as a museum, a film museum of poetry. We have the Isahakian poetry at the beginning. We're hearing, obviously, there's the Siamanto, the poem, the dance. There's music. There's both folk music, the ecclesiastical church music. So, like, I'm trying to use these amazing resources we have as Armenian artists. We have such a huge tradition of creativity. And to me, that's, again, I'm speaking from my perspective, but it's that link to incredible artists. Like the first one of the early films I made was a film called Calendar that we shot in Hayastan, and we made this very small film going to all the different churches, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of. I think it was the first independent film from the diaspora that came to shoot in a newly formed country, right? And so, but we were going to these ancient sites, these churches from like the, like we went to, like Sanahin, we went to Noravank, we went to, like Gerhard, we went to these churches and we shot these scenes, and we were so lucky to be connected to this tradition, ancient tradition of expressing ourselves, Armenian artists, architects, and to me that's a mystical link, like that's how I think that is kept, that identity is kept. Now, for other people, it's obviously through church, or it's through language, literature. We don't know enough about contemporary Armenian writers. I have a book by um, Aram Pashian, so I'm trying to keep up with the the literature of the country. So I would promote these books, which are now in English translation. So I think we need to make an effort to connect ourselves to the culture as much as possible, because that's what will survive. I mean, as well as, like we have so many issues in terms of politics, and these are immediate issues that we need to find ourselves, to how to defend ourselves properly, how to construct a. We are an ancient, stubborn culture. We are very stubborn people, and so we cannot be erased. And I see the church and I see the language as being part of that. But obviously, there's also a great engineering. When I talk about these ancient churches, it's all about engineering, like these breakthroughs that were made centuries ago. So we have to just acknowledge we're not going to go away. So how do we make our presence viable? That's that's really important. And how do we take advantage
What's
of,
interesting,
as you said, it was a dream for us as children. We never thought we would have an independent Armenia. It was like such a fantasy, and when it happened, it's a blessing. But it came with conditions. We're not in a very good place geographically. We're surrounded by a lot of hostile elements, to say the least.
but what's interesting is that when I listen to you, I see that more and more you have a connection to Armenia and identify yourself with the land where you and I don't come from, but
Mm.
that we feel as our own. And the safeguarding it and survival of the land seems to motivate and hopefully will motivate the next generation by you uh, featuring these ancient churches and the land through your films, through your culture and the music. I think that's very powerful.
I think in some ways it's like what we call a no-brainer. It's, like I think we have this great artistic tradition, and so for young people, it's clear. Like when you listen to uh, Armenian music today, which is so vital, contemporary music, like it's all connected. Like there's direct links, and as long as we understand and are proud and can sustain those links, then I think we're assuring that spiritually we are a presence. We can't be doing this fight unless we understand what we're fighting for.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Once again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and sharing your life experiences with our audience. We are getting close to Christmas, so let me wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Շնորհավոր նոր տարի եւ Սուրբ Ծնունդ բոլորին. Thank you, Atom.
Շնորհավոր Սուրբ Ծնունդ եւ նոր տարի։